I worked late that night in the NASA lab. I was 33 and had been there for years. The night was quiet except for the hum of servers around me. I sifted through data from deep space, waiting for something exciting to pop up, something new. At first, everything felt normal. My eyes were heavy, but I focused. Then I saw it. A series of readings that jumped off the screen. They were different from the usual data. Maybe they weren't glitches, but they had a pattern. They pulsed like a heartbeat. I leaned closer, my heart racing. It felt alive. I thought about reporting it, but I hesitated. What if they didn't take me seriously again? What if I was overreacting? Then, strange noises started filling the lab. I brushed it off at first. Old buildings creak, right? But this sounded like whispers, low and guttural. I felt a prickle run up my spine. I was alone, and the weight of the moment settled over me. The following nights I couldn't stop thinking about the data. I dug deeper. Each night, the odd readings grew more intense. My equipment started glitching. I heard those whispers again, louder now. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. My coworkers were busy. I glanced over at them. "Did you guys see those new numbers?" I asked once. They shrugged, too distracted to really care. But one night, I overheard a conversation. "This data feels like it's watching us," one of them said. I felt a knot in my stomach. The readings continued to pulse in my mind. I had dreams about it. Dark, shadowy figures danced in the corners of my sleep. I woke up cold, breathless. Something was happening. I wanted to shout, but I held my fears in. Then, one night, everything changed. I sat there in the lab staring at the screen. The readings peaked again, more intense than ever. I was glued to my chair. The whispers crescendoed, rising and falling around me. I was scared. Suddenly my coworker approached, eyes wide. "You need to see this," he whispered. My heart thudded as I turned to follow him. But then he stopped. I looked back at the screen. The data flickered, shadows dancing. I thought I saw a figure, something dark and shapeless, but it was gone in an instant. Just then the lights cut off. The darkness swallowed me whole. I froze. My breath quickened. I could hear my heartbeat. Then I felt it. A presence, cold and heavy against my skin, and then silence. I blinked, trying to adjust. What was happening? My mind raced. Had we opened something we shouldn't have? I glanced at my coworker. His face was pale. His eyes were wide with fear. I didn't know what was out there, but I knew we were on the brink of something terrible. What had we unleashed? In that moment I realized, this was not just data anymore. It felt like a warning. I snapped back to reality when the emergency lights flickered on. Dim red illumination flooded the lab, casting eerie shadows across the walls. My coworker was still frozen beside me, and the fear in his eyes mirrored my own. I tried to shake off the chill gripping my bones. "What just happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," he replied, his voice shaky. "But we need to check the system." We moved back to the control panel. The screen showed the same flickering patterns I had seen earlier, but now they pulsed erratically, as if they were alive. I thought about calling for help, but I hesitated again. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was causing this wouldn't want outside interference. As I typed frantically, another flash caught my attention. I turned my head and there it was again, a dark shape darting just beyond my peripheral vision. My heart raced. "Did you see that?" I asked urgently. "See what?" My coworker replied, eyes darting around. Before I could respond, the whispers returned, swirling around us like smoke. I was sure my mind was playing tricks. I squeezed my eyes shut, but opened them again, willing myself to be brave. This couldn't be happening. Then my coworker gasped. I turned to him. "What?" I demanded. His finger trembled as he pointed at the screen. "Look, the readings. They're coming from the asteroid belt." I felt a jolt of adrenaline. "The one we just observed?" He nodded. "This data, it matches. It's different though. This This is not natural. Panic rose within me. What if it was a signal? A call from something we couldn't understand? The whispers grew louder, surrounding us, suffocating me with their weight. I wanted to scream, but I was frozen in place. Then, the main monitors blinked violently before displaying images of the asteroid field. Something moved there, something large. My hands trembled as I struggled to focus on the details. "It's too big," I breathed. "It's massive." My coworker leaned closer, his eyes wide. "What is that? It looks—" And that was when the lights dimmed again, plunging us back into darkness. I felt the weight of silence pressing down, thick and heavy. I strained to make out shapes in the void, but I could see nothing. We stood there, just breathing, listening. Then it happened. A loud bang echoed through the lab, reverberating off the walls. I could feel the vibrations beneath my feet. The whispers turned into a chorus, a cacophony of voices, rising in urgency. "I can't take this," I shouted, instincts kicking in. "We have to get out of here." My coworker grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "Wait, the data. We need to save it." But how could I care about data when the very lab felt as if it was alive, thrumming with an unspeakable energy? My mind screamed at me to run. I turned to grab my things, and that's when I saw it, a faint outline behind my coworker, taking shape as if coalescing from the shadows. I wanted to shout, to warn him, but the words caught in my throat. The figure loomed closer, its form darkening the already dim lab. My heart hammered against my ribs. I realized, whatever we had uncovered, it was not just data. It was something we couldn't fully understand. And in that moment, I knew we were not alone. The shadow shifted, and panic surged within me. I wanted to bolt, but my legs felt rooted to the floor. My coworker remained oblivious, focused on the control panel. I forced myself to take a shaky breath, attempting to clear my thoughts. "Look behind you," I shouted, the words tumbling out in a rush. He turned, and for a heartbeat, the brief glint of confusion crossed his face. But in an instant, that confusion morphed into horror. The shape expanded, revealing more definition. The outline with vague features seemed almost human, but something was off. It flickered slightly, as if struggling to hold its form against the dim red light. "What? What is that?" my coworker stammered. I couldn't answer. My eyes widened, watching as its dark form drifted closer to him. It wasn't just the creature that terrified me. It was what it meant. Were we staring into the unknown, breaching limits we never should have crossed? "Run!" I screamed, finally breaking the spell. My voice sliced through the air, sharp with urgency. My coworker hesitated, but then instinct took over. We bolted toward the lab exit, the whispers growing louder as we moved. The alarms blared again, drowning out everything else. I could hardly process the chaos unfolding around us, colors blurring, shadows shifting. The exit felt impossibly far, and I could sense the presence following us, an inertia pulling unbearably close. We reached the door, and I slammed on the release mechanism, my pulse racing, but it wouldn't budge. Come on," I yelled, pounding on the keypad. "Let me," my coworker exclaimed, stepping closer as I faltered. He frantically keyed in codes, but nothing happened. I glanced back over my shoulder, and the dark shape was closer, merging with the shadows like smoke. In that split second, everything transformed. The lab began to tremble, the ground vibrating beneath us like a living organism. "We have to get out," I shouted again, but this time my words felt meaningless. Finally, the door clicked open, and we stumbled into the corridor, gasping for air. The emergency light still cast that eerie red glow, but now I noticed other figures, shapes moving in the distance. They were not uniform. Some were tall and elongated, others short and squat. My heart sank further. What are those?" my coworker whispered. "I don't know," I replied, fear weighing down my voice. I could feel the heat of their gaze, even from afar. It was as if we had stumbled into something we were never meant to encounter. We moved toward the nearest escape hatch, adrenaline fueling our legs. Strangely, the corridor was silent now, a phantom calm settling over us. I felt the urgency of danger, but my mind struggled to comprehend it. Just when we thought we were safe, a deafening crash echoed behind us, a shockwave through the hall. I turned to see the lab door bursting open, slamming against the wall. The outline of the figure stood there, now fully formed and terrifyingly real. It seemed to absorb the darkness around it, a grotesque silhouette against the flickering lights. "We need to hide," I gasped, but there was nowhere to go. "There's an emergency ladder," my coworker shouted, pointing towards an access point above. I nodded. It was our only chance. We climbed, every movement a surge of desperation. As I glanced back one last time, I locked eyes with the dark figure. Its expression was unreadable, but I felt it probing into me, looking for something. Then everything went still, and I wondered, what had we really stumbled upon that night? We reached the top of the emergency ladder, breathless and trembling. The dim light of the corridor below faded into darkness, swallowed by an eerie silence. We crouched on the metal platform, hearts racing, but instead of relief, uncertainty gnawed at me. "What now?" my coworker whispered, scanning our surroundings. I took a moment to listen. No sounds of the chaos from below. Had we really escaped? That thought felt fragile, like ice on the verge of cracking. I glanced around, searching for anything that could help us understand what we had just seen. There were pipes overhead, cables snaking the walls, but everything felt ordinary, too ordinary. "That thing, it was strong," I murmured, still haunted by the shadow's gaze. It wasn't just a shadow, it felt alive. Before my coworker could respond, I noticed a panel slightly ajar near the far end of the platform. "Look," I pointed. "Over there." He looked too, tension easing into curiosity. We crawled toward the panel, the sound of our movements echoing softly in the confined space. As we got closer, realization settled over me. There were strange symbols etched into the metal, patterns that looked nothing like any engineering notes I'd seen in the lab before. They glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm like a heartbeat. "Is that—" my coworker began but trailed off, eyes wide. "I don't know," I said, feeling a mix of fear and intrigue. The markings seemed too deliberate, too precise, suggesting they had a purpose. Maybe they were a warning? Or something even worse. I reached out, my fingers hovering just above the surface. Suddenly, the panel shook violently beneath my touch. My coworker grabbed my wrist, pulling me back. "What did you do?" "I didn't mean to," I stammered, but the panel opened more, revealing a glimpse of darkness beyond that didn't fit with the rest of the lab. The air that spilled out was cold, almost whispering. Before I could think, something shot out from the shadows beyond the panel, something small and angular. It zipped past us, ricocheting off the walls until it crashed against the far side of the platform. I recoiled, heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. "What was that?" my coworker shouted, eyes darting wildly. I didn't answer. My gaze was fixed on what had emerged. It was a small device, humming as it lay motionless on the ground. It blinked with faint lights, the same symbols flickering across its surface. "Should we touch it?" my coworker asked, but I hesitated, every instinct screaming to move. That dark figure wanted something from us. Perhaps this was part of it. Let's not, I finally said, stepping back. But as I spoke, the lights on the device brightened, and the pattern shifted, creating a sound, a low, unsettling tone that vibrated through the air. The moment felt electric. I could sense something building, a wave of energy surging before a storm. Then suddenly the corridor below us lit up, and we heard a commotion, a rush of footsteps racing toward us. My stomach churned. We weren't alone anymore. "Hide!" I hissed, urging us both against the wall as shadows began flooding the space below us. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever we had found was just the beginning. What had we unleashed? And more importantly, would we survive to find out? The footsteps drew closer, heavy and frantic, echoing through the metal corridor. My breath hitched, each second stretching into eternity. My coworker and I pressed ourselves against the cold wall, our faces barely inches apart. In the dim light, I could see the fear mirrored in his eyes. "What do we do?" he whispered, barely audible. I couldn't muster a coherent answer. The urgency clouded my thoughts. If whatever was down there found us, it would be over. The panel with the device felt like a dark omen now, a gateway we should have never touched. "Stay quiet," I finally said, my voice steadier than I felt. We strained to listen. The sounds from below were unmistakable. Shouts, laughter, and something else. Something that didn't fit. It felt wrong. A chuckle pierced the tension, echoing in a chilling way. I couldn't place it, but it made my skin crawl. As the shadows cast by the lights flickered below, I noticed something move down the corridor. It was a group of figures, about 5 or 6. They were wearing those blue jumpsuits we used at the lab, identical to ours. Confusion washed over me. Who were they? "Is that—" My coworker started but faltered, glancing at me, searching for direction. "They shouldn't be here. They shouldn't be alive," I murmured, grappling with the implications. I could hardly register the urgency of our escape, still processing how the chaos from earlier had turned into this surreal scene of people who might know what we'd just encountered. Suddenly one of them turned, their gaze fixed upward, and for a moment I thought we'd been discovered. But that wasn't what happened. Instead, the person brandished something shiny, an object that caught the light. "I found it!" they yelled, the glee in their voice horrendously out of place. My heart skipped. Then everything shifted. The device on the platform began to hum louder, vibration intensifying, matching the chilling tone below. The figures turned toward the sound, the mirth in their expression evaporating, replaced with dread. "We need to go. Now!" another shouted, panic seeping through their tone. Before I could think, they abandoned whatever they had in hand and started running toward the emergency exits. The lead figure, still looking upward, seemed transfixed by something. They were inches away from the panel we had opened. "Get down!" I hissed, dragging my coworker lower against the wall as the echoes of footsteps grew louder and disoriented. Then, the device pulsed one final time, and something unexplainable happened. A dark figure shot out from the shadows behind the fleeing crew, its outline a blend of shadow and horror. "That thing?" my coworker gasped. "I know," I said, feeling the urgency surge through me. I didn't have time to hesitate. "Let's get out," I urged again, adrenaline shoving aside my fear. We crawled backward, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the dark figure was watching us. It wanted something, and I wasn't sure what we had unleashed in our moment of curiosity. And then, amidst the chaos, a scream erupted from the corridor below. It was piercing, filled with terrified desperation. "Go, go, go!" I screamed, forgetting my own hesitation and scrambling toward the emergency exit. Whatever was happening behind us was no longer just an escape. It was survival. I thought we had escaped. I thought we had closed a door. But the shadows were closer. And I knew in that moment, this was only the beginning. I shoved the emergency exit door open, adrenaline fueling my escape. My coworker stumbled behind me, nearly colliding with the wall as we burst into the dimly lit stairwell. I glanced behind us, half expecting the dark figure to leap from the shadows, but the hall was empty, at least for now. "Which way?" my coworker asked, panting, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. I felt the weight of his fear, mirroring my own. "Down. We need to get as far away as possible," I replied, letting instinct drive me. I led the way, spiraling down the concrete steps. My mind raced with a mix of dread and confusion. Those figures in the corridor, what had they found? Were they affected too? As we reached the basement level, the lights flickered above us. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through my bones. It felt like the very walls were alive with something sinister. I stopped momentarily, straining to listen. The echoes of hurried footsteps faded with each beat of my heart, but that unsettling vibration seemed to intensify. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, glancing around. My coworker nodded, eyes wide. We pressed on, emerging into an expansive lab space cluttered with equipment. It was eerily quiet, the remnants of our earlier chaos lingering like an unseen ghost. The scene was foreign, yet familiar. It was hard to shake the feeling that we were intruders in our own workplace. I turned my gaze toward one of the massive viewing windows that overlooked an observation chamber. To my astonishment, there was movement inside. The silhouettes of the figures from earlier danced frantically against the glass as if trapped, only muffled sounds escaping through the thick pane. "Are they—" my coworker began, but the words trailed off as realization struck us both. "Let's get closer," I said. The thought of leaving them trapped behind that glass horrified me. What had we done? As we crept toward the viewing window, another sound cut through the silence. It was a soft, wailing cry. It seemed to pulse from the very core of the observation chamber, a sorrowful sound that sent chills down my spine. When we reached the glass, I pressed my hands against the cool surface. Inside, the figures were visible. They were scrambling and grabbing at something. Then I noticed they were not alone. The dark figure trailed ominously behind them, watching. "Why is it just standing there?" my coworker breathed, dread pooling in his voice. I don't know," I admitted, my chest tightening. It wasn't attacking. It was just waiting. Suddenly, one of the figures seemed to turn and look directly at us. Their eyes were wide with fear, pleading. I could almost read their lips, desperate for help. But before I could react, that dark figure moved closer, shifting in a way that made my stomach churn. "Back away!" I shouted. Instinct took over, knowing we needed distance from whatever was happening. But it felt too late. As we pulled away from the glass, panic surged. The hum intensified to a roar. The ground beneath us began to shake, and I knew we were running out of time. Then, from the corner of my eye, I noticed a flicker of movement. More figures, not from our lab, emerging from a side door. Panic spread through me again. "More of them," I stammered as the shadows surged closer. Just then, everything went dark. I blinked against the darkness, my heart racing as I tried to process what had just happened. We had been moving, trapped in a terrifying moment, and now, everything was silent. The rumble of the floor had died, and the frantic sounds from the observation chamber faded into an unsettling quiet. "Are you okay?" my coworker whispered, his voice barely breaking through the oppressive stillness. I took a moment to gather my thoughts. "I think so," I responded, though I felt anything but okay. "But we need to get out of here." Carefully, I reached out and felt for the wall. It was cool and smooth beneath my fingertips, and I moved along it, trying to find the light switch. Panic clawed at my mind. Where were those figures? What had they been running from? I pushed the thought aside. I had to focus on escaping. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, casting sharp shadows across the lab. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust, but when they did, I froze in shock. The observation chamber was empty. "Where did they go?" I muttered, my throat dry. The glass was clear now, revealing the stark emptiness within. Had we imagined it all? My coworker shuffled closer, scanning the room. Maybe they escaped. I shook my head. No, they were trapped. We saw them. A low sound echoed from the back of the lab, like metal scraping against concrete. It made the hair on my arms stand up. I turned to my coworker. "Did you hear that?" "Yeah, it came from over there." He pointed to a darkened corner where a door stood slightly ajar. My pulse quickened with every heartbeat. Should we check it out? I hesitated. The urge to run was strong, but curiosity held me in place. We can't just leave. What if there's more going on? It felt wrong to abandon the people we had seen. With a deep breath, we slowly approached the door. As we neared, the sound intensified. It was a rhythmic thud now, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. My heart raced. "Let's be careful," I whispered. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking ominously. Inside was a smaller room filled with shadows. I squinted but saw no movement, just a few scattered crates and a metal cart pushed against the wall. That's when I saw it. Just beyond the cart, something glimmered in the light. I stepped closer, my curiosity piqued, and gasped as I recognized it. It was one of the figure's belongings, a faded ID badge, showing a name I knew. "Wait, that's Dr. Harris. He worked in research with us," I said, holding it up. The name sent chills down my spine, and I felt sick to my stomach. "Why is it here?" my coworker asked, glancing nervously at the door. And then, just as the implications of that badge began to sink in, I heard a faint sound behind us. A soft, dragging noise like footsteps getting closer. "Get back!" I yelled, the urgency crashing down like a weight. Just as we turned to react, the door slammed shut, plunging us into darkness once again. I felt the cold metal of the door on my back, trapping us in the dimness. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps, the heavy silence turning oppressive. I could hear my coworker whispering my name, but it was drowned out by the escalating sound of dragging footsteps. Close now, too close. "Do you have a flashlight?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling. "No, I thought we were just checking the observation room," he whispered back. The footsteps stopped. My heart thudded loudly in my ears. I wanted to scream, to break the silence, but something told me it would only make it worse. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Listen," I urged. The dragging noise resumed, but now it was accompanied by something else, a low, rasping breath that chilled me to the bone. I could barely keep it together. "We need to find a way out." I fumbled around my waist for my phone, praying the screen would provide some light. I felt the familiar weight and pulled it out. The tiny beam flickered to life, illuminating the cramped space just enough for me to see where I was standing. To my left, a window loomed. It was barred, and I knew there was no way through it. To the right, the cart I had noticed before sat under a layer of dust, and I could see it now. It was covered in what looked like stains. I quickly turned my eyes away. "Nothing here," I whispered. "We have to find another way." As I turned to check the door, I caught a reflection of movement in the small beam of light. Someone was standing in the corner, just beyond the flow of my phone's illumination. My breath caught in my throat. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. No response. The figure shifted, and I could see a dark shape, taller than me, but too vague to make out any features. It was as if the shadows had come alive. "Stay back!" my coworker shouted, stepping in front of me. The faint glow of my phone highlighted the fear on his face. Then, miraculously, the door suddenly creaked open just a crack, spilling a sliver of fluorescent light into the room. It made the darkness seem more threatening somehow. "Quick, let's go!" I grabbed his arm as I edged toward the door, half pulling him behind me. We pushed through, but the next moment felt like an eternity. The figure was still in the corner, unmoving now as if frozen in time. Just as the last light faded behind us, the dragging sound returned, growing nearer. As we stumbled back into the main lab, I felt a surge of relief, but it was short-lived. Alarms began to blare, bathing the room in red light, and panic washed over me. We were far from safe. "Why are the alarms going off?" he yelled, his voice muffled by the chaos. "I don't know," I admitted, fear twisting my stomach, "but we need to get to the main exit." We dashed towards the far end of the lab, the pounding of footsteps still echoing behind us. It was impossible to tell if it was just one figure or more. Then I spotted something out of the corner of my eye, a metal door labeled Research Wing Restricted Access. "Over here," I shouted. I rushed towards it, desperate for escape, but just as I reached for the handle, it swung open. A figure stood in the doorway. I found out who they were, but the sight instantly made everything worse. The figure in the doorway was wearing a lab coat, but the face was unrecognizable. Their eyes were wide and empty, radiating a blank stare that sent ice through my veins. For a brief moment I thought it might be one of the researchers, but something about their posture, too still, too rigid, made me doubt that. "Get back!" I screamed, instinctively pushing my coworker behind me. The alarm screamed louder, pulsating red light reflecting off the sterile walls, intensifying the chaos. "What is happening?" my coworker shouted. His voice was barely audible over the blaring alarms. The figure didn't move, it just stood there, blocking our way. "Move!" I yelled again, my heart racing. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, but where? The other exit seemed too far away, and the footsteps were still behind us, dragging closer. Then the figure laughed, a low, haunting sound that echoed in the chaos. It wasn't human. It was guttural, almost inhuman. "What do you want?" I stammered, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. The figure finally spoke, but the words were slurred and distorted, barely coherent. "You shouldn't be here. They're watching. Waiting." My throat turned dry as I processed the words. I exchanged a panicked glance with my coworker. "What do you mean, they?" I asked, raising my voice against the noise. "Get out, now," the creature rasped, pointing a trembling finger behind us. A low rumble shuddered through the building, cutting through the blare of the alarms. I felt a wave of heat wash over me as I glanced backward. Something large, was crashing toward us, the sound of metal grinding against metal making my stomach turn. "What is that?" my coworker yelled, grabbing my arm. "Back to the other way," I shouted, yanking him toward the exit behind us. But as we turned, the door we had just come through was now ajar, revealing a shadowy figure stepping into the light. "No," I breathed, panic gripping my chest. "Not again." The figure from the observation room was emerging, more defined now, with an unsettling grin creeping across its face. It raised a hand, and I could see long, jagged nails, a grotesque reminder that we were far from safe. "Run!" I screamed, but the sound barely escaped my lips. In a feverish state, we dashed down the darkened corridor, the alarms blaring louder than my heartbeat. The shadows seemed to stretch after us, reaching with ghostly hands. But then everything changed. The lights flickered and went dark, plunging us into pitch blackness. The alarms fell silent. I gasped as the sound of footsteps filled the void around us, no longer dragging, but rushing toward us. "Where are you?" I whispered, fear gripping me tighter. That's when I felt it, a cold breath against my neck. Someone or something was right behind me. "Keep running," I shouted, but as I turned to flee, I realized I had lost my coworker in the darkness. My heart sank. I was alone. The footsteps were closing in. A low growl broke the silence, echoing all around me. I stumbled forward, desperately searching for any semblance of light, but it was gone. "Help!" I cried into the darkness, my voice swallowed whole. Then, just as suddenly, I saw something. A glimmer, a flicker of movement ahead. I could barely make it out, but it was there. Something was lurking in the shadows, and it was watching me. I darted toward the flicker, adrenaline propelling me forward even as dread rooted itself in my core. The glimmer illuminated a small area ahead. My instincts screamed it might be a way out, or perhaps a trap. I dove into the shadowy light, hope battling with terror as the footsteps echoed ominously around me. As I emerged into the sudden brightness, I found myself standing in what appeared to be another lab, but this one was different. The walls were lined with monitors, flickering with static, and the same incomprehensible data I had been studying for weeks. The air felt charged, as if I had stumbled into the heart of whatever we had opened. I quickly glanced around for an exit, but something stopped me. A large screen dominated the room, filled with imagery of the cosmic readings we had been analyzing. The whispers returned, swirling in my mind, familiar now, laced with urgent undertones. They seemed to be calling to me, pulling me toward the screens. I squinted at the data, and that pulsing rhythm emerged again. It felt like a heartbeat, and I realized, terrifyingly, that it wasn't just an anomaly. It was alive. That's when I noticed something move in the corner of my eye. I turned, and there was the figure. The dark shape loomed against the doorway, blocking my only retreat. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its gaze, heavy and expectant. It wanted something from me. "Stay back," I shouted, even as my voice trembled. The figure tilted its head, either in curiosity or mockery. I couldn't tell. The nagging question burst through my thoughts. What did it mean by they? "Get out! Now!" The command came from the screen, a distorted voice cutting through my mounting panic. It echoed my earlier fight for survival, and seemed to emerge from the very data itself, reminding me that this was more than just a threat. How deep did this run? Feeling cornered and relentless panic setting in, I began to scramble toward the computer console. My fingers raced over the keyboard, inputting commands I barely understood. I had to shut it down. Whatever it was, it couldn't continue. The pulse intensified, and the whispers turned into a symphony of chaos. Suddenly, the lights began to flicker above me, and I realized the figure was moving closer, gliding soundlessly. I couldn't afford to let it touch me. But the screens showed patterns morphing, the warnings escalating. It was as if the lab itself was alive, and with every second it consumed the last of my resolve. "Please," I yelled, my voice cracking. "I just want to leave." The figure halted, head tilting at an unnatural angle, and then it lunged. Panic flooded my veins as I ducked beneath its grasp and lunged toward an exit door at the far end. I crashed through, spilling into another corridor, barely registering whether I was escaping or running deeper into the abyss. I sprinted through the dimly lit passageways, heart pounding, desperately glancing back over my shoulder to see the dark figure slipping through the doorway behind me. It was relentless, and every instinct screamed I couldn't let it catch me. Finally, I burst through another door and emerged into a final lab, this one brimming with equipment. Desperation clawed at me to find some way to stop whatever was happening. My eyes darted around. There had to be something. That's when I noticed a glass case domed over an odd-looking device pulsing with energy. As I raced toward it, warning lights began flashing, bathing the area in a frantic red glow. The crackling hum echoed louder, and I could almost hear the dark figure bearing down, the whispers roaring against my ears. I had to know. With shaking hands, I reached for the control panel. My fingers hesitated above the activation button, a part of me aware that this could either be my salvation or my undoing. I slammed my palm down on it. The device came alive, humming with power, and in that moment the air charged with electricity. "Now!" I shouted at the pulsating screen, not knowing if it would help or else trigger something worse. Suddenly everything went still, the hum increasing to a deafening crescendo. The glass dome shattered, sending shards flying. A wave of energy surged from the device, flooding the room in blinding light. For an instant I felt weightless, as if I was suspended between realities. And then, darkness pulled me under. When I came to, I found myself lying on cold concrete outside the building, gasping for breath. Blinking against the bright sunlight, it took a moment for my mind to process what had happened. I was free. But as I sat up, groaning, confusion washed over me. There were no alarms, no creatures, no chaos. Just silence. I glanced around. My heart sank. There were figures standing in the distance watching. Instinctively, I squeezed my eyes shut, convinced I had unleashed something that would forever haunt me. Had I stopped it, or just delayed the inevitable? A chill raced down my spine as I stood and took a hesitant step forward. I didn't know if I would ever understand what I had witnessed in that lab, whether it had been a cosmic phenomenon or a descent into madness. But one thing was clear. I might have escaped, but the echoes of what I encountered would linger, forever casting a shadow over the very fabric of my reality. As I turned to flee, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Whatever had been awakened was still out there. I moved away from the building, my heart pounding in rhythm to that haunting pulse I once thought was just a whisper, still echoing in my mind, calling, bidding, waiting.